Over the past few years, I've been creating an urban farmstead right here in my backyard and sharing the entire process with you here on YouTube. But this year has seen the biggest transformation yet. I'm finally growing in my new raised garden beds, the orchard is full of fruit, and my new subtropical food forest that I planted a few months ago is thriving. But I've been traveling in Europe for the past 3 weeks, and I'm excited to see what's changed in the garden during that time. I'm also excited to share with you some of the things that I do that allow me to leave my garden for 21 days straight in July through multiple heat waves and know that when I return, my garden will not only be alive, but thriving. So let's check it out. We'll start here in the northeast corner of the garden, which gets the very least amount of sunlight in the entire garden, particularly because there's a big garage right here that blocks all of the morning sun. So they get good midday sun, and then the afternoon sun is kind of blocked by the row of tomatoes on the other side. But they do get good sunlight banking off the stucco wall of the garage, and there's a window right here. So they get good heat and reflective light coming in. That really helps this crop a lot. But even with that reflective light and heat, I can't really grow a good beefsteak tomato here because it's just not enough sunlight. But what I can grow are cherry tomatoes. So I've got 5 plants here. The first 3 are all bumblebee varieties. It's kind of the trio of bumblebee tomatoes, starting with the pink bumblebee, which is a really nice pink and orange striped tomato. Then the purple bumblebee, which is kind of a pink purple with green stripes, and the sunrise bumblebee, which is a nice yellow and orange stripe cherry tomato. All 3 of these have similar flavor. They're all very productive, kind of a larger cherry tomato, and I've been growing them for a while. Really nice varieties, just beautiful, delicious tomatoes. Then down here on the south side, I do get a little bit more sunlight coming into these plants because they're on the south end. So I planted some medium-sized tomatoes here. So this one's called Dark Galaxy. This is my first year growing this, but it's producing really well. A lot of tomatoes right here that are ripe, a lot more green ones ripening up soon. Haven't tasted this one yet, but I'm excited to. Let's cut into one and see what it looks like on the inside. So that's a cool looking tomato right there. All right, nice pink flesh, not a lot of seeds, good amount of flesh. It's a good looking tomato. Just past the Dark Galaxy, another one that I haven't grown before. This one's called Blue Green Zebra. I've grown green zebra a lot of times, and they have this beautiful yellow and green striping, but this one adds in kind of a nice purple striping to it as well. Really nice crop on this, a lot of tomatoes. These look like they're ripe to me. I haven't grown this one before, so I don't know exactly what they look like when they're fully ripe, but I know green zebras look about like this. And these are getting pretty soft, so I think that's ripe. Let's cut into this and see what this one looks like on the inside. All right, nice green flesh. Good looking tomato right there. So pretty good crop here considering it's the darkest section of my garden. Let's go to the other side that gets a lot more sunlight. Here on the west facing side of this tomato bed, I've got all my larger beefsteak tomatoes that really require that full day sun to size up like this. In the ideal location, southwest, I've got my favorite variety, my new official favorite variety. This is the striped German tomato, and it's one I've been growing for a while. It's just got the best flavor, I think, for a large slicing tomato, perfect for tomato sandwiches. Also has this beautiful striping. It's like a yellow-orange striping. You cut into it, it's yellow and orange on the inside. Absolutely beautiful. And it's also the largest variety that I grow. I've grown these over 2 pounds before. This one's probably about 1.33 pounds. So large and very productive. 2 ripe ones here. I've got a couple more hiding in the back here, and a lot more on this plant sizing up. They're going to be ripe soon. So striped German, great tomato. Next to it here, I've got my previous favorite variety. Still a favorite, but not #1. This is the Italian red pear. Previously my favorite variety, still of course one of my favorites. I guess I'll call it my second favorite variety now. It's kind of a paste tomato, but I think they're delicious sliced and on tomato sandwiches as well. Just a lot of flesh on here, not a lot of seeds and pulp on the inside. Delicious tomato, very productive. You can see I've got a lot of big green ones up here, a lot more hiding in the back as well. And then next to that, the Cherokee Purple. This has been my most long-standing favorite heirloom tomato. It's your classic heirloom. It's a nice dark purple, a little bit of green in it. But as far as heirlooms go, if you've ever grown heirlooms, you've noticed probably that they're not as productive as hybrids and they're not as resistant to diseases. But Cherokee Purple seems to be very resistant for an heirloom. I always get a really nice crop. I don't have a lot of problems with disease, and it continues to fruit through the heat pretty well for me here. So I've got a couple nice ones down here, a couple here, and a bunch more back here with a lot of green ones starting to ripen up top. You can see this one here has some sun scalding on it, and that's not necessarily a characteristic of the Cherokee Purple. That's just because these are getting beaten down by that west-facing sun. So sun scalding is going to happen if you have tomatoes either on the south or the west side of your garden that gets sun all day long. Just a little scab, a little sunburn, totally edible, a lot of good flesh on this still. I'll just cut that off. A couple things you can do to prevent sun scalding. If you notice, I don't really have sun scalding on any of the other tomatoes here, but they're getting that afternoon sun. One of the things is I don't over prune these tomato plants. I do sucker prune them a little bit, but if you prune them down to 2 or 3 liters and they're getting a lot of sun, you're not left with enough leaves and branches to shade out these fruits. So if I was to prune these down to 1, 2, or 3 liters, I would probably have sun scalding on almost all of these. Instead, I lightly prune them and allow the vegetative growth above to shade this fruit so they don't burn. The other thing you can do is take a leaf from a squash or another plant, and you can just place this over the tomato. That's going to dry up on that tomato and it will protect it from that sun scald. You want to wait till it's started to color up a little bit so it can ripen for you. But that's what I've been doing here with these striped German. I just put a leaf on there, dries up on there, and if you notice, these have a lot of sun exposure in the afternoon and no sun scalding on them at all. So that's why. Once these started to color up, I put a leaf over them and just left it there. It's a good little hack, really easy way to prevent that sunburn. As far as this trellising system goes, this is my modification of a Florida weave system. So there's posts at either end and then string goes back and forth to hold them in nice and tight. As I said, I do a little bit of pruning, but not a whole lot. And as they grow, I just add another string. So these are about 18 inches past the top. I'll add one more layer of string pretty soon and just keep going up. These are 10-foot posts put into the ground 2 feet. So I've got 8 feet of growth allowed on these. And even once they reach the top, which they will and fall, they'll just kind of topple over the edge and come back down maybe another 2 feet before the freeze comes. So easy way to keep them in nice and tight, very low maintenance, works really well. I mean, this is the system essentially that the farmers are using for indeterminate tomatoes on their farms. It works well for them, works well for me. If you haven't tried it out, try it out. I do have a full video on how to make a Florida weave system on my channel when I was growing the tomatoes in the ground. Very similar to this. This exact system here in these beds, I showed that on my Instagram channel. I don't have a YouTube video for it yet, but I hopefully will next year. So overall, I'm really happy with this tomato crop, especially after being gone for 3 weeks. During that time, the only thing that's been done is some friends came by and harvested some tomatoes, but these things are otherwise self-sustaining. They're on automatic irrigation. They get water twice a week right now. Even through the heat waves over 100 degrees, I don't water my tomatoes or any of my other vegetables more than twice a week. Just long durations of deep watering, encouraging those roots to go nice and deep in the soil, and they're thriving. I've got a lot of ripe fruit that I'm going to harvest today and a lot of small green ones that are going to be ripening up for the next couple months. Here on this east facing side of this bed, again, I've got the garage here, so not a lot of morning sun, good midday sun, and then not a lot of afternoon sun, but cherry tomatoes, because they're smaller, thrive here. You can see 5 different varieties. All of them have a lot of fruit on them, especially this one on the north end here. This is the Berries Crazy Cherry, and it's the name's in it, right? It's crazy. The clusters on this are just wild. They're not little scaffolds. They're like, these things are falling off. There's so many of them, but they're not like big long scaffolds like you'll see some cherry tomatoes. They're just kind of these wild clusters, huge clusters, very prolific of these very attractive yellow kind of grape tomatoes. Mild flavor, they're not super sweet, good acidity level, but always super productive for me. And then next to it here, this is the Principe Borghese, one that I found in Italy a few years ago. And this is a variety that has thicker skin, more flesh, and a little bit less pulp and seeds on the inside. These are really good for storing fresh. So this is something that you can harvest a bunch of these and just keep them on your kitchen counter, and they're gonna stay fresh for weeks before you eat them, even when you harvest them when they're fully ripe and full of sugar. Also really good tasting tomato. Nice to smash these and put them in pizzas and pastas. Next to that one, right here, that I missed is the Sun Gold. I think this might always be my favorite cherry tomato. It's a classic. You're probably growing this one if you're not, or if you haven't. Very sweet, always productive. I love the Sun Gold. And next to it is the Sun Green. So like the Sun Gold, but ripe when they're green like this. These are probably the second most prolific tomato in the cherry tomato family I've got here. They don't have the giant clusters that the Berry's Crazy Cherry has, but there's tons of clusters all over the plant. So here's one right here I'll cut off. See this whole cluster. So these, I mean, they look like unripe tomatoes, but you know they're ripe when they're a little bit soft. The skin will become a little bit translucent and they kind of get a little bit yellow. But that is a delicious and beautiful tomato. So these are called Sun Green, like Sun Gold, but green. Great tomato to add to your cherry tomato collection, especially for more color in your tomato salads. And then down here on this end, I've got the Favorita, which for me has been the most disease-resistant cherry tomato that I've ever grown. I always get consistent crops of this. It's a hybrid variety and it's resistant to a lot of diseases. So if I did have a year where these died early from diseases or weren't producing well, the Favorita is gonna be kind of my catch-all. This one will always produce for me. I've not had a year where it hasn't been very productive. So I give it a good spot on the south end, so I always have a lot of nice red cherry tomatoes. All right, let's see the other side. Here I've got my tomatillos. I've got 5 plants here, 2 of Super Verde, which is a classic green tomatillo, really nice size to them, really good for sauces. And then the purple tomatillo, a beautiful, delicious tomatillo, but a little bit smaller. And of course, if you've been watching for a while, y'all know my favorite tomatillo variety. I've got 2 of these Queen of Malinalco, the most delicious and unique tomatillos I've ever seen or tasted. They're these long yellow tomatillos and delicious straight off the plant. They taste like tropical fruit. Also really good cooked into sauces or used for salsa, but I could just snack on these Queen of Malinalco all day long. The purple ones are really nice, but if you cook with them, they will turn brown. Keep that in mind. And then the green ones are great as well. One of the things I love about growing tomatillos here in Sacramento, where we get sunny days all summer long and it gets really hot, I mean 107 today, these things will continue to fruit through the heat waves. Unlike the tomatoes that their pollen gets sterilized when it's like in the 90s, especially 100 degrees like today, they're not going to be putting on fruit today. The tomatillos, these flowers will still continue to fruit through the heat. In addition to that, they also have this husk on them that protects the fruit from sun scalding. So this whole row right here is west facing. This gets harsh afternoon sun all afternoon. If these were tomatoes, there would be sun scalding over most of these, but because they have this husk, they don't get any sun scalding. And then growing tomatillos, just like growing tomatoes, they're gonna be way different than what you get at the grocery store. Just like tomatoes, they harvest them when they're too early, so they haven't fully produced all the sugars in them. If you eat a fresh tomatillo from the grocery store, it's gonna be bland and bitter. They are great in sauces, they are, but you can't really eat them fresh. The homegrown tomatillos, their husk turns yellow. The flesh will turn a little bit yellow, gold, green, and they're sweet like this, especially the Queen of Malinalco and the purple ones, but even the green ones are great fresh when you can allow them to fully ripen on the plant. Yeah, you can't do that with a store-bought tomatillo. All right, let's move on to the peppers. In this bed, I'm growing all my sweet peppers. So I've got 2 rows of Carmen, a sweet red pepper, and 2 rows of Escamillo, the sister of the Carmen. It's a sweet yellow pepper. I started growing both of these varieties about 4 years ago after having continued years of not getting the results I expected from bell peppers. And these are a great substitute for bell peppers. They're much more productive for me, and I think they're much more flavorful. Like a bell pepper, these will size up when they're green, and you can definitely harvest them and eat them when they're green. But if you leave them on the plant, they'll color up to yellow and red, and they'll be a lot sweeter. So I'll harvest some of these when they're green, but for the most part, I keep these on until they color up. I have these planted 12 inches apart, and that does a couple of things for me. For one, I don't have any type of staking or trellising for this bed. So if they were further apart, it would be really easy for them to fall over, but being close together, they kind of support each other a little bit. And then the main thing is here in Sacramento, we get a lot of hot, bright, sunny days, so it helps to shade one another. Some people will put shade cloth over their tomatoes and their peppers, and that's a great idea, but by just planting them close together, you get shading on most of them. I could end up with some sun scalding here on the west-facing ones with the afternoon sun, and on the south-facing ones that get all-day sunlight, but for the most part, these peppers put on a good crop through the heat, they color up well through the heat, and they don't have very much sun scalding, and a lot of that is attributed to the close planting. These are all putting on a really nice crop. I've got 6 to 8 peppers on most of these plants, and they've got nice branching with new peppers coming on, so it's going to be a good year for the Carmen and Escamillo peppers. Let's move on to the spicy peppers. This is my spicy pepper bed where I've got a few different chilies that range in their level of heat. So in the front row here, I've got Jimmy Nardellos, which are a pretty mild heat, but they're a classic Italian frying pepper from southern Italy. Beautiful red chilies, long, slender. They kind of get a little bit wonky and curled like this. Just really, really nice flavor. And they're thin-walled, so they're really good for drying and crushing or storing. Then in the next row, I've got some super hots. I've got Carolina Reapers and a couple of other ones, but those normally take a lot longer to produce fruit, so these won't really be fruiting until fall. And then I've got some habanada peppers, which are the heatless habanero. These are putting on a good crop right now, but they still have, I'd say, 3 to 4 weeks left before I can harvest those. And then let's go look on the other side of the bed. On this side of the bed, I've got 2 full rows of Fresno chilies. The variety is Flaming Flare Fresno chili. It's a variety I've been growing probably for 4 or 5 years now because it's always been very prolific for me, very reliable. And this is my go-to pepper for my spicy peppers. It's essentially the heat of a jalapeno, but the flavor of a red bell pepper compared to a green bell pepper. So just a more flavorful jalapeno, and who wouldn't want to add that extra sweetness and flavor to balance out that heat? So they're perfect in any dish you would use a jalapeno. My favorite thing to do with these is to make hot sauce. They're my go-to pepper for hot sauce. I'll make a huge batch of a sriracha style hot sauce every year. Lasts me through the year, and I have enough to share with friends and family. These are ready right now, so I can harvest these and make that hot sauce. I also like to use them for drying, so you can either sun dry them if you live in a hot, dry place like I do, or you can put them in a dehydrator and just crush them up, make crushed red pepper. You can make a chili oil with them. Very versatile, reliable, delicious pepper. So Flaming Flare, Fresno chili, probably any variety of Fresno chili are going to be a good one. These plants are all spaced about 12 inches apart. The rows themselves are 12 inches apart. And I didn't top the peppers this year. Sometimes I do to help with branching, but this variety branches really well. And I'm also not supporting them with any type of staking or any trellis system. They have a nice balanced scaffold, so they're supporting themselves and their crop really well, just like a well balanced scaffolded fruit tree. These things are holding themselves up, and by not staking them and supporting them in the spring, as the winds kind of pick up around here, it's making the stalk and the stem more solid and encouraging deeper roots because they're feeling that wind resistance, as opposed to having a stake there and they don't have to compete with it. They'll have a more slender stem. So combination of not staking them and also using the right fertilizer contributes to a more stout plant with a good crop, nice branching that can support itself. I use a balanced fertilizer. What you don't want to do is use a fertilizer with too much nitrogen. So nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. The nitrogen's important, but if there's too much of it, you get this big tall plant that topples over and you don't get very good flower or fruit set. So something balanced. I use EB Stone Organics tomato and vegetable fertilizer on all my stuff. I've got a video on fertilizing summer gardens, and you can check that out for more information, just general information on what to look for in a summer vegetable garden fertilizer. But that's what I use. As you can see, great crop on all of these. The plants themselves, really nice stout stems on them, really nice balance. These are in full sun all day long and just look beautiful. So excited to make a lot of hot sauce with these soon. This is my root vegetable bed. I've got golden beets down this side, red beets down the other side, and carrots in the center. I've got 5 rows of carrots about 5 to 6 inches apart. And I don't typically grow carrots in the summertime here. I normally try to plant them in fall and grow them through winter. And I've had some success with that, but because it's not really warm enough for the carrots to really grow vigorously, I end up with kind of small carrots. So this year I found a bunch of expired carrot seeds as I was going through my seeds this spring and sowed these all out, just kind of overseed all of them, which is the best thing to do with carrots, and then thin them later. I like to wait a little bit to thin them until they size up a little bit to an edible size, and then you can kind of eat what you're thinning rather than just toss them out. But with one of the rows, I had really bad germination because the seeds were probably like 8 years old, and that's what's going to happen with older seeds. They will just have a lower germination rate. So what I did was I transplanted some of the carrots from one of the rows that had really good germination into the row that had very poor germination. And that's not typically something you want to do with carrots. You don't really want to transplant them. You never want to buy carrots from the nursery that are in pots because it's a taproot vegetable. So they have this big, long taproot, and it's very easy to disturb that. And once you do, you're going to end up with a carrot that either splits or bends, and it's just not the way to go. So ideally, you want to direct sow. You don't want to transplant them, but I tried that out as an experiment because I had that row of bad germination, and what else was I going to do with it? So we'll see how that transplant went and check out some of the other ones that I'm growing here. This first row is, I think, a purple carrot. All right, so not a bad little purple carrot. These are orange on the inside. Okay, wow, check this thing out. Looks like just a wide, fat carrot, and then on this side, this thing totally just exploded. I don't grow carrots often enough to know what causes something like this, so maybe if you do, you can tell me in the comments below, but that's an interesting carrot right there. The next row is where I had the best germination because I think they were newer seeds. They weren't expired. All right, nice classic orange carrot. Probably be a little bit larger if I thinned them early, but these are still growing. They've got time to bulk up. But instead of thinning them early and then just throwing those thinnings in the compost, I was able to enjoy those. So I think it makes up for it. And speaking of thinning these were also the ones that I thinned and transplanted some into the next row. So let's see how those transplants work. I'm not having high hopes for them. Okay, there's one. Okay, same variety, and you can see it's very, very stubby. And that's because most likely it was transplanted. So that's what's going to happen. You'll get a stubby one, or this, you'll get one that splits into multiple carrots. They don't like these tap roots to be disturbed. This is kind of the result of that. So I would have had an empty row, would have had nothing. It's better to transplant them and get this. These are fully edible rather than nothing at all. But if your goal is to grow nice carrots, don't plan on just like starting them in containers and then transplanting them. This is what you're gonna get. So just overseed all of your rows and thin them, either thin them early or thin them as they size up a little bit, and enjoy those thinnings, and you'll get decent carrots like this, or you can transplant them and get wonky carrots like this. Totally up to you. In this bed, I'm growing all of my squash and cucumbers. So I've got a variety of different summer and winter squash. Mostly for winter squash, I have these miniature butternut squash and coconut squash, both really nice small varieties. And then for summer squash, I'm growing center cut squash, which is technically a winter squash, but you harvest it early when it's about the size of a zucchini. And you would use it the same way as a zucchini, but it has, in my opinion, a lot better flavor, a bit nutty in a really nice way, and they are a lot more dense. So they hold up a lot better for cooking than a zucchini because they're not as watery as a zucchini. So they stay really nice and firm when you cook them. Another really nice thing with a center cut squash is that it's a vining plant. So if you want to grow it on a trellis, which I normally do, you can take up a lot less space in your garden. But you can also put it in a bed like this and just let it vine around. All of these are vining plants, so I normally let them spill over the edge and kind of bring them back in when they get a little bit too wild. But I'm also letting them vine up this hedge back here with the cucumbers. So I planned on building a hog wire trellis along this edge to let the cucumbers and squash vine up it, but with other projects I had going on, I kind of ran out of time, and this hedge was right here. I saw them starting to climb up it, so I said, why don't I just see what happens and see if they can naturally climb up this hedge and use this as a trellis? And it's worked pretty well. Of course, I would have better results if I built a true trellis because they would get better sunlight, better airflow, easier to find. But you can see all these vines climbing up here. I've got a nice cucumber right here. This is an Armenian cucumber, one of my favorite to grow always, because, well, technically it's a melon, not a cucumber, but the flavor is very much like a cucumber. A little bit melon flavors to it as well, but really nice, crisp. And my favorite thing about this is it keeps fruiting through the heat. You've probably noticed that as a trend for me. Here in Sacramento, with so many hot days in summer, I'm always looking for something that's going to tolerate the heat. And Armenian cucumbers, as well as striped Armenian cucumbers, do really well with the heat. Another really nice thing with the Armenians is that when they get large on the plant, and they will get large, this is going to get twice as large if I leave it on here, they don't get bitter once they get large. Normal cucumbers will get very bitter if you wait too long to harvest them, and the seeds get really large. But this is a good size for this, but I could even leave it on here. It would get twice as large, and it would still be fully edible. So Armenian cucumbers, really nice. Stripe Armenians are actually my favorite. I've got a few of these hanging here on the trellis as well. They're pretty similar, but they have a really nice dark green and light green striping to them. Also very delicious, and those things will get massive as well. There are actually a lot of squash and cucumbers climbing up this hedge naturally, and it's fun to see them just kind of growing wild up here, but I think I would have a lot better crop if I had a true trellis, so I probably won't do that again. On the west side of this bed, I'm growing eggplant, one row of two different Japanese eggplant varieties. I like the Japanese eggplant because they're just kind of like a smaller, slender variety compared to the larger ones. So they've got a nice flesh to seed ratio on them, and I think they're delicious. So a couple different varieties of those here. And then the next row is pepino melons, or pepino dulce. This is my first year growing these. Not a true melon, but they do taste kind of like a honeydew melon. Really crisp, juicy, refreshing fruit, but I believe they're in the nightshade family. They look a lot like eggplants, and the plant themselves look like an eggplant plant would. And this is my first year ever growing these. I actually propagated all of these from cuttings. I probably got like 40 to 50 cuttings propagated from one plant that I bought. And these are sizing up nicely. They're not ripe yet. These are going to turn more of a yellow color with some purple striping on them once they're ripe. But they're doing great, and I'm really excited about these pepino melons. On this end of the bed, I'm growing okra for the first time ever. I've never grown okra before. I don't know why. It's something I do enjoy eating, but it's just never found a place in my garden. And I've learned a couple of things so far growing it. I've learned that it grows taller than I expected. These things are way up here. I thought they were gonna be like up to my waist by this time of year. We still have a couple months of the growing season, so I don't know what I'm gonna do, but they're self-supporting. I don't have them staked or trellised or anything like that, so they're supporting themselves fine, but they get a lot taller than I expected. But I think that's also depends on the variety, because this is a red one. It's way up here. I'm growing a green variety in the back, and it's right here, a little over half the height of the red ones. So pretty tall. The other thing I learned is that you have a very short window for harvesting okra, like a day or two. It's kind of like zucchini, you know, it's almost ready, then it's overripe. So what will happen is they will flower, then the next day they set their fruit. The next 2 days are kind of like your harvest window, depending on the variety and your weather and everything. And then after that, once they get large, they get very firm and fibrous, and they're no good to eat anymore. So it depends on the variety, I think, on the size, because these red ones are about twice as long as the green ones when they're ripe. Same with, I guess, reflects the height of the plant. But really, you know, when you try to slice into it. If you try to slice into it and it's not cutting through, you're not going to be able to chew into it either. So here's a green one and a red one that I'm growing. These are good size. These are a little bit on the large size, actually, especially for these green ones, but these are still good. Some of these bigger ones that are on here, these are just left on here because when I was away for 3 weeks and had people come by and harvest things, I don't think they maybe didn't know how to cook okra or something. But these large ones like this, these really aren't good for, I don't know what they're good for. If you have a suggestion for what to do with overgrown okra, leave it in the comments below. Otherwise, I'll probably put these in the compost. That covers most of what's going on here in my new raised garden beds, but this is just one of many sections in my garden. I still really want to show you the orchard that I planted just a couple of years ago, and I have a full series on my orchard, but this will be the first time ever showing all of the trees full of fruit. And of course, I want to show you my new subtropical food forest where I'm growing mangoes, papaya, guava, and all kinds of rare tropical and subtropical fruit that you don't typically see growing here in Northern California. So I'll share full tours of both of those sections very soon. But in the meantime, I started a full series on this section, my vegetable garden, to show you everything that I'm doing to create and maintain this space. So I'll add a link to that series here. But as always, if you have any questions at all about my garden or your garden, ask them in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, hit that like button. And if you want to follow along to see me create my urban farmstead, consider subscribing. Happy gardening.